for these iPads.
Ask and it shall be given.
Yes.
So yours?
Ask and it shall be given to you, yes. The Lord will provide.
The Lord will provide.
Good evening all, thank you very much. My name is Pushkar Sharma, use he, him pronouns, and I'm honored to be here tonight. Thank you so much to Reverend Peter and Reverend Neil and the whole TRNP team for the kind invitation to speak. Honestly, I am deeply moved that so many people would come out tonight, this evening, to engage on this topic. And I think the depth of rigor and depth of scholarly analysis and a commitment to equity, equality, social justice is really inspiring. I'm speaking to you as a practicing, committed Hindu Buddhist in front of you. And I have to say openly and honestly, because I think that was one of our criteria tonight in the way we engage with each other is honesty. And I want to say openly and honestly, I am, frankly, I don't know, there are no words to say it, saddened by the fact that there is nobody in my faith community and tradition here tonight that I know that I can engage with openly and honestly. I see a very nice open engagement with many folks here who are clearly committed to equality, inclusion, and making progress in this country and worldwide. And I'm saddened to say I don't see anyone that I know of in my community yet that I've met. Not that I know everybody, but I would have hoped to have come out and seen many familiar faces here tonight within my community. And I'm sorry that we're not here, even though in Naperville there's a huge population of folks. So I'm sorry to say that. It's not a knock on the organizers. I think they've done a great job of doing the outreach.
Here's your brother.
And so I hope.
Front row.
Yeah, I don't know you, sir. So
Yeah, you don't know me, but
I hope to get to know you tonight and have a conversation with everyone today. I want to give a little bit of background on my own family tradition and our own history. Our family comes from a region called Lahore, a city now is currently in Pakistan, had been part of colonial, British colonial India. And as the British exited in 1947, they split the colony up into multiple countries, India, Pakistan. That partition era in 1947 is described as a period where 10 to 12 million people were forced into being refugees, people exiting India to Pakistan, people exiting Pakistan to India, and it's believed that 1 to 2 million people actually died in that period. So actually, I come from a community, a Hindu family that was forced to leave Lahore and shift to what's now India because of religious persecution. And I think it's something that we've passed on in our family, a tradition that no one should ever experience that again. Right? No minority faith community, no person by any, split up by any different layer of who you are in your identity should be forced to experience that. As a result, human rights have been deeply ingrained in my life, and I have been fortunate to pursue an education where I've been able to get a master's in public policy focused on human rights, international conflict resolution. I studied at Columbia University in New York City, where legendary figure Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, which we might speak more of, actually studied in the 1916, 1920s, something around that era, who is an icon in the fight for caste justice, and actually the lead architect of the Indian secular constitution. So being somebody who has studied human rights, who has a deep passion for human rights and justice, I'm fortunate to say that I've been able to work in human rights for over a decade with the United Nations at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Geneva office. Worked with the United Nations actually in Israel, Palestine, and the Gaza Strip. I was working there for 2 years in humanitarian access from 2013 to 2015. I was able to work at the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Kosovo that was seeking to build trust across different ethnic communities in the Balkans. And roughly about a year ago, I was named a Soros Equality Fellow by the Open Society Foundation. It's a fellowship given to folks who are working on racial justice issues in the US. So I'm very fortunate to have had this kind of background and I should say expertise in human rights and public policy and the intersection, and actually am fortunate to be able to serve on the board of Hindus for Human Rights. Their Hindus for Human Rights Action is the board that I serve on. So it's a national organization of progressive Hindus working pro-democracy coalitions across the country. So that's a bit of my background and who I am and why I'm speaking to you. I thought it would be helpful to give a little bit of a background before I go into kind of the formal presentation. I founded an organization with a number of friends a couple of years back that's called SACRED, South Asian American Coalition to Renew Democracy, because in part inspired just like TRNP, committed to our secular democracy, committed to multi-faith engagement, committed to multiracial engagement, and bringing people together in service of our democracy. And so that's why we founded SACRED a couple of years back. I should say the headline, if you take away anything from my presentation tonight, I should say it openly and plainly. The ideology of Gandhi's assassin is funding elected officials in the United States. It's funding elected officials in our backyard here. And I can say that openly because we've done the research, and actually I was fortunate to be able to speak with Gandhi's great-grandson, Tushar Gandhi, who lives in India just in the last month. He's a passionate advocate for social justice, as you know, is the family tradition. And he's open on this. You know, he's written a book that's called Let's Kill Gandhi, that literally documents Gandhi's assassins and a Hindu supremacist ideology that led them to assassinate Gandhi. For those who aren't that familiar with this story, Gandhi was assassinated primarily because there was a belief that he supported other faith communities and did not believe in Hindu supremacy, did not believe in a Hindu state, did not believe that an independent India should be a religious state as opposed to a secular state. Many scholars also look at his assassination as a place where many looked down upon Gandhi, many in the Hindu supremacist movement looked down upon Gandhi because they believed him to not be, let's say, macho enough or aggressive enough. They looked at him very feminine, right? Using nonviolence, using fasting, using a number of tools that people viewed, these kind of extremists or the patriarchal mindset looked at as being feminine, right? I celebrate these things. I celebrate this as an achievement. You know, Gandhi, you could argue, is the most famous Hindu in the history of the world, at least in the Western world for sure. And to see that he was assassinated not by a minority faith community or somebody else, another faith community, but by Hindu supremacists is shocking in its own right. The fact that this ideology has been in government in India for roughly the last 10 years, since 2014 really, is deeply disappointing. And so when I say again, to have this conversation and to speak as I speak, knowing my family, knowing our history, knowing the community well, I should say openly, there are very few spaces for Hindu communities to say what I'm saying to you today. There are very few spaces where people are comfortable, allowed to say these things. There are very few spaces where that are formal religious spaces where people can gather and have these conversations. So I speak to you all at a moment of crisis, deep spiritual crisis in the community. And I say this again, I don't know if you can hear the trembling in my voice, but it is an alarm I'd like to ring for all of you tonight. I want to talk a little bit more about what's happening in Illinois. I know Reverend Neil hinted at multiple things he wanted me to talk about, but unfortunately I'm not prepared to speak to those. So I'm hoping Reverend Neil may come back and round out those points that you were uplifting or laying out earlier. But I'll speak for myself and talk a little bit more what I know best, which is the state of Illinois, the city of Chicago, where I reside. Just very briefly, before I go into detail on that, I'm happy to share for all of you more documentation on, as I described, Gandhi's assassin. This has been published by the BBC in a 2022 article by a reporter named Sutak Biswas, which talks more about Gandhi's assassin and links him to an organization called the RSS, Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh. This is what I would describe as an organization that doesn't believe in secular democracy. You can go to their website. They openly condemn secular democracy on their website. This is a website where this is an organization that motivated Gandhi's assassin, and Gandhi's assassin was actually a member of the RSS. So when we talk about the RSS in the grand scheme of history, and we go back to Reverend Cook's excellent introduction, where we talk about the origins of these types of religious extremist movements, many of it, when we come back to the 1930s and we come back to Italian fascist movement, the rise of Hitler, and we come to a point in time in history where we see, Hitler and Nazi Germany rising. Has anybody read the book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson? Anybody seen that? Mm-hmm. See some great hands in the room. Okay, great. So many of you could finish this half of the presentation for me. But in that book, it's a 2021 bestseller by former New York Times columnist and a Pulitzer Prize winner, a woman named Isabel Wilkerson, African-American author, who I think is at the top of her game, and Caste, I think, was her most recent piece, but I think people think that as really an incredible introduction to the American public to these extremist ideologies and connecting the dots. So Wilkerson in that book looks at this concept of caste supremacy, and you can look at racial supremacy, and you start to look at the similarities. What is caste? Who can work what jobs? Who can marry into what communities? Who can live in what part of town? Who can drink from what water fountain? Et cetera, down the list, right? So I'm not going to give you a full lecture on that. You can go to that book and read more about it. But when we look at the rough parallels between racism and casteism, they're there. Many people ask why did Hitler look at this concept of the Aryan race, right, which was believed by many who believed in eugenics in the early 1900s, who believed in racial supremacy, an Aryan race, a master race, right? And Hitler actually looked towards South Asia and started talking about this deep connection of, looked at the caste system and said, this is exactly what we're looking at. So there's, Wilkerson really identifies these parallels then. Wilkerson also then documents how leaders of the RSS were inspired by Hitler and Nazi Germany. In fact, one of the founding fathers, M.S. Goldwalker, who's a person who, again, if you go to the RSS website, you can see it on their the website that there is an image of this individual who actually celebrated the Holocaust. He looked up to the Holocaust and said, the treatment of Jews in Nazi Germany is what we should do to Muslims in India. Fairly straightforward. Again, that's my, go to Isabel Wilkerson and read more about this. That's a little bit of the architecture of the broad background here and the attacks on secular democracy in India, but we're seeing that kind of attack on secular democracy imported into this country as well. Many of you may know of an organization in the western suburbs called the Republican Hindu Coalition. Has anybody heard of this organization? It's in Carroll Stream, which is not that far from here. It's an organization that came up in around 2015, 2016 in the era of President Trump, or then candidate Trump's first run for office. It's an organization that is openly supportive of then candidate Trump, now President Trump, and it's very much an organization that aligns very much in the MAGA movement. We should say that organization, if I were to name, does anybody know who the honorary co-chair of the Republican Hindu Coalition is? Any guesses? Anybody? Oh, there we go. Somebody has done their homework coming in tonight. Steve Bannon, who is, what you could argue is a global crusader for white supremacy. I should say he was, in jail and jailed for, I think, a few months for his actions. But Steve Bannon is neither a person of faith, in my opinion, but he's definitely not a Hindu. And for some reason, this organization, the Republican Hindu Coalition, that explicitly espouses to be a faith-based organization, has named Steve Bannon, again, global crusader for white supremacy, as a co-chair. So that is not, folks, we're not talking about Texas, we're not talking about Florida, we're talking about Illinois. We're talking about in our own backyards here. And when I speak to many of my friends in Chicago and I say, do you know who brought Steve Bannon to town? They say, oh, the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers, the neo-Nazis or something. I said, no, it's actually an organization called the Republican Hindu Coalition. It's founded by a tech billionaire, it's a very wealthy individual who lives in this area. So that is nothing but the facts. But this is shocking to many of us who, in the community, in the Hindu community, or in the pro-democracy movement, say, why are these ideologies coming together? Why are they working together? and why are they getting together in our own backyard in this state? But then, as many of us have seen in recent years, you see leaders like Vivek Ramaswamy, who wrote a book as an author, who was attacking the ideology of diversity, equity, inclusion, attacking the concept of social justice, attacking the concepts of an inclusive democracy. He has also proposed things like raising the voting age to 25, that English should be the only national language in this country. Of course, it's deeply ironic, right? His own forefathers' own family, that English is not their first language, and yet he's calling for English-only voting. So it's an individual who came up as wealthy kind of tech billionaire, and then later became a political figure. But when he wrote this book, Woke Inc., I think is the name of the book. Please don't buy it. He has enough money, but the point is, he's embraced this kind of ideology, right? This anti-democratic rhetoric, this anti-democracy rhetoric, this anti-voting rhetoric, anti-minority rhetoric, and has actually become a champion of this movement. When you look at the current cabinet of the United States of America, you see at least three individuals who say that they are, quote, proudly Hindu. I question their credentials personally. When you look at Kash Patel, you look at Tulsi Gabbard, and you look at Jay Bhattacharya from the NIH director. But these are folks who say that they believe in their minority faith, Hinduism in this country. And I ask myself, as a Hindu, why are you backing an ideology that would replace our secular constitution with the Bible, right? It's threatening all of our lives, threatening all of our communities, threatening our religious freedom, threatening our First Amendment rights. And yet, they're in bed with this pro-authoritarian movement, right? And they have said that, it doesn't matter, the community doesn't matter, the country doesn't matter, their own personal power matters, right? That's the only logic I can see of why they're embracing this movement. So it's deeply problematic for all minority faith communities. I say that as a call for all of us to stand up and criticize and try to call these people in, to try to say, why are you threatening your own communities? If you're a Hindu, why would you back a Bible over a constitution? Stand up for every individual's right to believe in what they believe and practice their faith fearlessly in this country and globally, right? So very quickly, I'm going to give a couple of local examples and then talk a little bit about Sacred's work, and then I'll pass on to Reverend Neil. We've seen a number of local examples of anti-democratic acts, and we're actually, it's a sad state of affairs in the state of Illinois. I haven't heard anyone say it yet, but I think both speakers are not from Illinois. But does anybody know of the Quran burning in Naperville? Anybody hear about that? And so this is an act of, provocative, despicable act of violence. This is a Quran burning that took place, I think it was 2 summers back, and news broke in, I think, October 2023. And it's a violent act against religious freedom and the ability to practice your faith fearlessly. When I speak to my friends in Chicago and across Illinois, people don't know. They think that the Quran was burned. They would say, in a southern state or a state where they believe, doesn't stand up for minority faith communities like Illinois does. People are shocked to hear that it happened not only in Illinois, not only in the Chicagoland area, but in Naperville, which, tell me, Naperville is the number 3 best town to raise your family in the country, something like that. What's the indicator that they always say? So, it's shocking to see that any book of faith, a book that should be revered and respected and should be a source of learning and harmony, should be attacked. I should say, I didn't explicitly say this, but the organization CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, Chicago, it's an organization where Mayor of Chicago, Governor, Senators Duckworth and Durbin have been at their events publicly, openly support this organization. It's an organization that said the RSS and its affiliates were linked to this Quran burning. I want to talk very briefly about pieces of legislation in Chicago City Council that were pro-democracy and pro-secular democracy in India. Piece of legislation in the state level in Springfield that was a piece of legislation that would create an Indian American Advisory Council to the governor of Illinois. These were 2 pieces of legislation that should have passed with flying colors without any issue, but they're both times that we saw groups like the RSS rise up with massive amounts of disinformation, which we should say that's their number one resource is disinformation. And they were able to really muddy the waters in the City Council of Chicago and at the state level in Springfield to support passage of really Hindu supremacist concepts in pieces of legislation. Thankfully, in the case of the Advisory Council in Springfield, in the state of Illinois, many of us were able to gather multi-faith response, multiracial response to tell the governor that there were Hindu supremacist tropes in this piece of legislation. We were able to take what was a discriminatory advisory council to make it an inclusive South Asian American advisory council that would build power across the South Asian American community, including faith communities of all backgrounds, and welcome diversity openly in that council that had been bigoted in its first incarnation. So thankfully that was a story of, frankly, that's kind of the story of Sacred's origin, that piece of legislation in Springfield. We were able to get together and speak to a number of elected officials who quickly understood what was the issue, and the governor signed off to address that. So it taught us that actually this ideology has made massive inroads in the city of Chicago, in the suburbs, at the state level, and we needed a response. So that's why I'll pause there for now.
There'll be questions, so.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll do a panel, I think. But I think it's very important for us to come together and to take action in a multi-faith, multiracial way. I really commend TRNP and our host tonight Wesley United Methodist Church. Got it? There we go. There you go. Thank you so much for inviting us and for building this community, for open engagement. I'm happy to sit on the panel and answer questions and have an open, honest conversation with you all tonight.
Thank you. We're going to take 5 minutes for 2 respondents and then open it up to questions. And so I'm going to invite, if Jay and Chakravarti could come on over here, so you have about 5 minutes each. Based on what you've heard and based on what you'd like to share, we're going to turn that over to you. So come on up. Come on up. And then we're going to open this up to the full section. Okay. And would you like to stand? Do you want them to stand at the podium? I think partly because of the video, if you don't mind.
I need to.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. Well, hello.